A dagger gleamed against her throat while flames devoured her childhood castle. Catalina felt the cold metal against her skin and knew there was no turning back. The man she had sworn to hate her entire life looked at her with eyes that promised both pleasure and destruction. "You're mine now," he whispered, and she felt her world crumble and be reborn at the same time. The price of saving her mother would be giving her heart to the most dangerous enemy of her kingdom. If you love intense stories like this, subscribe to the channel and comment below what city and country you're listening to this forbidden romance from. The carriage swayed violently on the cobblestone path, while Catalina de Santa Maria pressed her trembling hands against her black silk dress. Every stone the wheels hit was a cruel reminder that she was moving away forever from everything she knew. Her mother, Lady Isabella, lay dying in the highest tower of the family castle, victim of a poison that only Prince Alejandro de Valdemar possessed the antidote for, the same man she was now heading to become his wife. Catalina's green eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. For years she had heard stories about the cruelty of the prince from the northern lands. They say he had executed his first wife for treason, that he tortured prisoners in his castle's dungeons, that his heart was as cold as the eternal ice of his mountains. And now she, the daughter of his fiercest enemy, would be his second wife. The pact had been sealed with blood and desperation, her virginity and eternal obedience in exchange for her mother's life. The icy wind filtered through the carriage's cracks, making Catalina shiver under her velvet cloak. She remembered her father's last words before dying on the battlefield. "Never surrender yourself to a Valdemar, my daughter. Prefer death before dishonor." But as her mother faded, hour by hour, Catalina had made the most painful decision of her life. She would betray her father's memory to save the only family she had left. When the carriage stopped abruptly, Catalina felt her stomach twist with terror. Through the window, she could see the black towers of Valdemar Castle silhouetted against the leaden sky. The guards who approached wore armor as dark as their expressions. One of them opened the carriage door with a mocking bow, and Catalina knew she had crossed the point of no return. Her feet touched enemy soil, and each step took her further from the woman she had been. The castle gates opened with a metallic groan that echoed in the deserted courtyard. Catalina walked between torches that cast dancing shadows on the grey stone walls. The cold seeped into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the ice she felt in her heart. Each step resonated like a hammer, striking the coffin of her former existence. The servants looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and pity that made her feel like a lamb on its way to sacrifice. A stern-faced butler guided her through endless hallways adorned with portraits of Valdemar ancestors. Their eyes followed her from the golden frames as if they knew the secret she carried. Catalina kept her chin high, refusing to show weakness before the ghosts of the enemy passed. Her mother had taught her that a lady never reveals her fear, no matter how deep the abyss opening beneath her feet. "His Highness awaits you in the library," murmured the butler, stopping before a solid oak door. Catalina breathed deeply, knowing that crossing that threshold would bring her face to face with the man who possessed the power of life and death over her mother. Her fingers trembled as she touched the cold handle, and for a moment she considered fleeing, but the image of her mother, delirious with fever, strengthened her. There was no turning back, only facing the demon and praying she would have some soul left when it was all over. The door opened with a whisper, and Catalina entered the most sumptuous room she had ever seen. Bookshelves full of books rose to the ceiling, and a fire crackled in the black marble fireplace. But none of that mattered, because there, with his back to her, contemplating the flames with his hands crossed behind his back, was Prince Alejandro de Valdemar. His figure was more imposing than she had imagined, and when he slowly turned to look at her, Catalina felt the air escape from her lungs. The most intense eyes she had ever seen pierced her like blue ice daggers, and she knew her life had just changed forever. "So you're the little Santa Maria," said Alejandro with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His voice was deep, dangerous, like the distant roar of a storm. Catalina felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the castle's cold. The prince was younger than she expected, perhaps in his 30s, with hair black as night and a jaw that spoke of strength and determination. He was dressed completely in black, and a thin scar crossed his left cheek from the temple to the corner of his lips. "I am Catalina de Santa Maria, and I have come to fulfill the deal," she responded, surprising herself with how firm her voice sounded. She refused to show how intimidated she felt by this man's overwhelming presence. Alejandro approached with measured steps, like a predator studying its prey. Every movement spoke of lethal, contained power, of muscles trained for war, and hands that knew both caress and violence. "The deal," he repeated, stopping just one step away. Catalina could smell his masculine scent mixed with leather and iron. "Tell me about this deal, little enemy. Tell me exactly what you think you've come to do here." His eyes swept over her, from head to toe, with an intensity that made her feel naked. It wasn't a lascivious look, but something much more dangerous. It was the look of a man evaluating every weakness, every vulnerable point. Catalina's heart beat so loudly she feared. He could hear it. She forced herself to keep her gaze fixed on those blue eyes that seemed to see directly into her soul. "My mother is dying from the poison you ordered. I come to offer you my hand in marriage in exchange for the antidote that can save her." The words came out like broken glass, cutting her throat. She had never imagined that pronouncing her own condemnation would be so painful. A harsh laugh erupted from Alejandro's lips, a humorless sound that echoed in the library. "Poison your mother!" He moved away from her and poured 2 glasses of red wine from a bottle resting on his desk. "Little Catalina, there are things you don't know about your precious family." He extended a glass to her, but she rejected it with a sharp shake of her head. The wine spilled on the Persian rug like drops of blood. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, though a terrible cold began to spread through her chest. There was something in Alejandro's expression, a mixture of contempt and something that seemed like pain, that terrified her more than all the stories about his cruelty. "My mother is dying, and you have the antidote. That was the message you sent." Her voice began to break despite her efforts to stay strong. Alejandro set his glass on the table with a sharp blow that resonated like a gunshot. "Your mother is not dying from any poison of mine, Catalina. She's dying because years ago she decided to murder mine." The words fell between them like spears thrown from atop a wall. Catalina staggered backward, feeling the ground move beneath her feet. "What are you saying?" "Lady Isabella de Santa Maria murdered my mother with her own hands during a peace banquet," Alejandro continued, and now his voice was pure, cutting ice. "She put belladonna in her wine while she smiled and spoke of reconciliation between our houses. My mother died vomiting blood while your mother watched her without the slightest remorse." Each word was a dagger that sank deeper into Catalina's heart, destroying everything she believed she knew about her family, about herself, about the world. The air became unbreathable. Catalina gripped the back of a chair, feeling her knees failing her. Everything she had believed for years crumbled like a house of cards. Her mother, the sweet and pious woman who had raised her, the woman for whom she had come to sacrifice herself, was she a murderer? No, it can't be true. But as she said it, fragments of memories began to make terrible sense. Her mother's nightmares, her unexplained crying fits, the way she crossed herself obsessively every time someone mentioned the Valdemars. "Your expression tells me you're starting to remember things, doesn't it?" Alejandro circled the chair where she leaned, like a wolf cornering its wounded prey. "The nightmares, the trembling, that way your mother could never look directly in. The eyes when she spoke of the war. His voice had become soft, almost whispering, but loaded with lethal danger. Catalina closed her eyes, trying to block the images that began to form in her mind like pieces of a cursed puzzle. But Alejandro wasn't finished. He positioned himself in front of her, so close that Catalina could see the golden flecks in his blue eyes. "Do you know what's the most amusing thing about all this? That it wasn't me who sent that message asking for your hand." A cruel smile curved his lips. "It was your mother. She wrote to me begging me to let her die in peace, offering me the only thing she thought I might want. You." The words hit Catalina like physical slaps, leaving her breathless. "No, she wouldn't do that," Catalina murmured, but her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Memories crowded in. Now her mother, insisting she come alone to Valdemar Castle, the way she had avoided looking her in the eyes when they said goodbye, those strange words about paying for the sins of the past. "She loves me. She wouldn't hand me over as—" Her voice broke before she could finish the sentence. Alejandro pulled a letter from his jacket and unfolded it slowly before Catalina's eyes. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's. "Read," he ordered with a harsh voice. The lines blurred before Catalina's tear-filled eyes, but the words burned into her heart like molten iron. "Take my daughter as payment for my crime. Do what you want with her, but let me die knowing I have paid my debt to you." The letter fell from her trembling hands. A torn sob erupted from Catalina's throat. It had all been a lie. Her noble sacrifice, her heroic decision to save her mother. It had all been a cruel farce. Her mother had handed her over like cattle, like an offering to calm her own guilt. The woman who had killed Alejandro's mother now offered her own daughter as compensation. "I'm just a form of payment," she whispered, and the words destroyed her completely. She expected to see triumph or sadism in Alejandro's eyes, but when she looked up, she found something completely different. There was pain there, a deep wound. She recognized because it was similar to her own. "No," he said with a hoarse voice, "you're not just a form of payment." He knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. His palms were calloused but surprisingly warm. "You're a woman who has been betrayed by the one who should protect you most." Tears began to fall down Catalina's cheeks without her being able to stop them. Years of filial love crumbled before the cruel reality. Her mother had killed out of jealousy, had lived with that guilt for decades, and in the end had decided to buy her peace by handing over her own daughter. "What are you going to do with me?" she asked with a broken voice. "Are you going to kill me to avenge your mother? Are you going to torture me like they say you do with your prisoners?" Alejandro stood up and walked to the fire, contemplating the flames with a tormented expression. "Those stories they tell about me, not all of them are lies," he admitted, without looking at her. "I've done terrible things in the name of vengeance. I've been exactly the monster I needed to be to survive in this cruel world." He turned toward her, and Catalina saw in his eyes a suffering that rivaled her own. "But with you, I can't be that monster." "Why?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. There was something in the way he looked at her that made her heart beat in a completely different way than fear. It was something dangerous, something that threatened to make her forget all the pain and betrayal. Alejandro approached again, and this time Catalina didn't back away. There was something magnetic about his presence, something that attracted her even while her mind screamed at her to flee. "Because when I look at you," he said with a rough voice, "I don't see the daughter of my enemy. I see a brave woman who was willing to sacrifice herself for someone who didn't deserve it. I see someone who has been hurt as much as I have." His fingers gently brushed the wet cheek of Catalina, and she felt an electric current run through her body. It was completely improper, completely dangerous. But for the first time in her life, she felt someone truly saw her beyond her surname, beyond the expectations and duties that had defined her. The following days passed like a strange haze in Valdemar Castle. Catalina had been installed in a sumptuous suite in the East Tower, with views of the snow-covered gardens and the mountains that rose like sleeping giants on the horizon. Alejandro hadn't mentioned marriage again, nor had he tried to claim any right over her. Instead, he treated her with a distant courtesy that puzzled her more than if he had fulfilled all the threats that had reached her ears about him. Every morning he appeared at her door with a polite invitation to accompany him, to walk through the gardens, to visit the library, to see the stables where he raised the most magnificent war horses she had ever seen. Catalina accepted because she had nothing else to do, but mainly because there was something about Alejandro's company that calmed the constant pain she felt in her chest. With him, she could forget for moments her mother's betrayal and the uncertainty of her future. During those walks, Alejandro told her stories about the castle, about his lonely childhood after his mother's death, about the years of war that had turned him into the man he was now. His voice softened when he spoke of the past, and Catalina began to see glimpses of the boy he had been before pain transformed him into the Iron Prince everyone feared. She in turn told him about her own childhood, about the books she loved to read, about her dreams of traveling beyond her kingdom's borders. "Did you never want to marry for love?" Alejandro asked her one afternoon while they walked through the portrait gallery. Catalina stopped before the portrait of a woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. "Your mother, the late Princess Elena de Valdemar. Yes," she admitted softly. "I dreamed of finding someone who would love me for who I am, not for my dowry or my surname." She turned toward him and added with a sad smile, "But those dreams died the day I decided to come here." Something changed in Alejandro's expression. His eyes darkened, and he approached her with that way of moving that reminded her of a feline. "What if I told you they don't have to die?" he murmured, and his voice had a hypnotic quality that made Catalina's heart race dangerously. "What if I told you there are things more powerful than revenge?" His fingers brushed hers, an apparently accidental contact that sent waves of heat through her entire body. Catalina knew she should move away, that what she was feeling was a betrayal of everything she had believed about herself. Alejandro was her enemy, the man who had planned to destroy her family. But when she looked into his eyes, when she saw the pain reflected there like a mirror of her own suffering, all of that seemed to belong to another life. "What are you saying?" she whispered, though her heart already knew the answer, and it beat like a war drum. "I'm saying I'm falling in love." "With you, Catalina de Santa Maria," he confessed with a hoarse voice. "And I don't know what the hell to do with that." The words fell between them like sparks in a powder keg. Catalina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Everything she knew about good and evil, about love and loyalty, crumbled before the intensity of what she saw in Alejandro's eyes. It was desire, yes, but also something much deeper and more terrifying. "You can't," she began to say, but he interrupted her by placing a finger gently on her lips. The contact burned her as if it were molten iron. "I can't what? Can't feel? Can't desire something more than revenge after all these years of hate?" His other hand rose to caress her cheek, and Catalina found herself leaning her head toward the caress like a flower seeking the sun. "You have awakened something in me that I thought was dead forever." Common sense screamed at her to flee, to remember who he was and who she was. But her heart, treacherous and reckless, had already made its decision. "Me too," she confessed in a broken whisper. "I too feel something I shouldn't feel." The admission filled her with terror and relief at once. For days she had fought against the attraction growing between them like a bonfire fed by hurricane. Winds. Alejandro's hand slid to her nape, burying his fingers in her brown hair. "Then we're lost," he murmured, and there was as much pain as desire in his voice that Catalina felt like crying. "Because this thing between us is going to destroy everything we thought we knew about ourselves." He leaned toward her, and Catalina could feel his warm breath against her lips. The world shrank to that moment, to that dangerous proximity that promised to change everything forever. A thunder of horse hooves and war cries shattered the castle's quiet like lightning on a serene night. Alejandro pulled away abruptly from Catalina, the magic of the moment breaking into 1,000 pieces. "Stay here," he ordered with a harsh voice as he headed toward the window. What he saw made his face harden like stone. "Santa Maria, soldiers, your brother comes for you." Catalina's heart stopped. Rodrigo had come to rescue her without knowing she was no longer sure she wanted to be rescued. "It can't be," she whispered, running to the window. There was her older brother, magnificent in his golden armor, leading a regiment of men. His face, so similar to hers, was disfigured by fury. "Alejandro de Valdemar!" His voice roared through the icy air. "Return my sister to me, or I'll set fire to your damned castle." The words hit Catalina like punches. Rodrigo had come to save her from a fate she no longer wanted to avoid. Alejandro headed quickly toward the door, but Catalina stopped him by grabbing his arm. "Don't go," she begged him, and in her voice was a panic that surprised her. "Please don't go. He's going to try to kill you." The idea of losing Alejandro now, just when she had discovered what she felt for him, filled her with a terror she had never known. Her fingers dug into his arm as if she could stop him by force. "I have to face him," Alejandro responded, but his eyes didn't leave Catalina's anguished face. "It's his right as a brother, and my responsibility as the man who has you under his roof." He stopped, as if struggling against his own words. "Besides, maybe it's better this way. Maybe he can give you the life you deserve, away from me and all this darkness." But while he spoke, his hand rose to touch her face with a tenderness that belied his words. "I don't want that life," Catalina confessed with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "I don't want to return to a world where my mother used me as currency, where my brother decides my destiny without asking what I want." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from pain, but from fierce determination. "I want to stay here. I want to be with you, even if it's a sin, even if it's impossible." Alejandro's eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and desperation that cut Catalina's breath short. "Do you know what you're saying? If you choose to stay with me, there will be no turning back. Your family will repudiate you. The world will call you a traitor. You'll be the woman who fell in love with her enemy." His voice broke on the last word, and Catalina knew he too was terrified by what he felt, by what it would mean to admit it completely. "Then I'll be that woman," she declared, and in saying it she felt as if she were removing invisible chains she had worn all her life. "I'd rather be hated for being myself than loved for being what others want me to be." A louder crash resonated from the courtyard, followed by battle cries. Rodrigo had begun the assault, and every second that passed brought them closer to the moment when there would be no possible choice. Alejandro looked at her as if he were seeing a miracle and a curse at the same time. "Catalina," he began, but she silenced him in the only way she could think of, rising on her tiptoes and pressing her lips against his in a desperate and perfect kiss. For an instant, he remained motionless, as if he couldn't believe this was happening. Then something broke inside him, and his arms surrounded her with a force that spoke of years of loneliness and emotional hunger. The world exploded in colors and sensations that Catalina had never imagined. Alejandro's lips were firm and warm, with a taste of wine and danger that intoxicated her instantly. When he responded to the kiss with a passion he had been containing for days, his mouth became more demanding, more possessive, and Catalina felt she was flying and drowning at the same time. Her hands tangled in his black hair, and when Alejandro moaned softly against her lips, a shiver of pure desire ran through her from head to toe. The thunder of battle seemed to come from another world, because in that moment only the two of them existed. Their ragged breathing, the heat emanating from their united bodies, and the absolute certainty that they had just crossed a line from which they could never return. When they separated, both breathed as if they had run miles. "Now there's no turning back," Alejandro murmured against her lips, and there was a fierce promise in his voice. "You're mine, Catalina de Santa Maria, and I am yours. Let the whole world oppose us if it wants." He embraced her with a force that spoke of possession and protection at once, and Catalina knew she had found her home in the arms of the man who was supposed to be her enemy. The thunder of battle was approaching, but for the first time in her life she wasn't afraid of the future. The battle in the castle courtyard had been brief but fierce. When Alejandro went out to face Rodrigo, he carried Catalina's confession in his heart like a talisman. He didn't fight like the ruthless warrior everyone knew, but like a man who had something precious to protect. The duel between the two men was epic. Swords clashing under the falling snow, cries of fury resonating between the stone towers. But when Rodrigo fell wounded, Alejandro didn't deliver the final blow. Instead, he extended his hand to help him up. "Your sister chose to stay," Alejandro told Rodrigo as he helped him to his feet. "I chose to love her more than my own revenge." The words fell like hammer blows on the young Santa Maria's pride, but there was something in the prince's gaze that made him doubt. It wasn't the look of a conqueror, but of a man deeply in love. When Catalina appeared running from the tower, with her dress torn from haste and her eyes bright with tears, Rodrigo saw something he had never seen in his sister. True happiness. "Rodrigo!" Catalina gasped, throwing herself between the two men. Her hands trembled as she touched the wound on her brother's arm, but her eyes didn't leave his confused face. "Forgive me, brother, but I'm not going back with you." Her voice broke, but there was an unshakable firmness in it. "I've discovered who I really am when I don't have to be the perfect daughter, the obedient sister. I've discovered love, and I won't give it up for our family's pride." Rodrigo looked alternately at his sister and the man who had been his enemy his entire life. In Catalina's eyes, he saw something that completely disarmed him, the same fierce determination he had seen in his father when he spoke of his love for his mother. "Does this man treat you well?" he asked with a harsh voice, addressing Alejandro more than her. "Does he respect you, protect you?" Those were the only questions that mattered, the only ones a brother who truly loved could ask. "He sees me," Catalina responded simply, and those two words contained a whole world of meaning. He doesn't see the daughter of Santa Maria. He doesn't see a political tool. He doesn't see a victim. He sees me, Catalina, with all my flaws and my dreams. She turned toward Alejandro, and the smile she gave him was so radiant that Rodrigo felt his heart break with pride and loss at once. "And I see him, not the prince of the northern lands, but the man who chose love over revenge." The following months brought changes no one could have predicted. Lady Isabella, upon learning that her daughter had chosen to stay with Alejandro, finally confessed the truth about the murder she had committed decades ago. In a heartbreaking letter addressed to both Catalina and Alejandro, she revealed that she had killed Princess Elena in a moment of blind jealousy, believing her husband loved her more than her. The weight of that guilt had tortured her for years, finally leading her to offer Catalina a sacrifice for her crime. Alejandro forgave Isabella, not for her, but for Catalina. "The sins of the mother are not the sins of the daughter," he declared in a proclamation he sent to all neighboring kingdoms. "Lady Isabella de Santa Maria will live the rest of her days, secluded in a convent, paying for her crime with prayer and penance. But her daughter, Catalina, will be my wife and my princess, because love has proven to be more powerful than hate. The news caused scandal in the courts, but also secret admiration among those who believed in the redemptive power of true love. The wedding was celebrated in Valdemar Castle's chapel one spring morning, when the gardens were covered with flowers white as snow. Catalina wore the wedding dress of Alejandro's late mother, a gesture of forgiveness and acceptance that made everyone present cry. When they exchanged vows, they weren't the traditional words they pronounced, but promises that arose directly from their wounded and healed hearts. "I promise to love you more than my pride," said Alejandro. "I promise to choose you every day over fear," Catalina responded. Their first child was born the following year, during a snowstorm that recalled the night Catalina had first arrived at the castle. When Alejandro took the baby in his arms, Catalina saw tears in the eyes of the strongest man she knew. "He looks like you," he murmured, and there was so much tenderness in his voice that Catalina knew her son would grow up knowing only love. Never the poison of hate that had poisoned previous generations. They had broken the cycle of revenge that had defined their families for decades, replacing it with something infinitely more powerful. Love that chooses to forgive, love that chooses to heal, love that chooses to build instead of destroy. Have you ever felt that destiny was taking you exactly where you needed to be, even though the path was the most painful you could imagine? Catalina and Alejandro discovered that sometimes the deepest love is born from the ashes of our greatest tragedies, that sometimes we have to lose everything we thought we were to find what we can really become. If this story touched something in your heart, like and subscribe to the channel right now. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own happiness? Do you think Catalina made the right decision by staying with Alejandro? If you felt something,